Also, Beth, I think, is it okay if I share the screen since probably I have more of the slides that I'll click through just so I'm not bugging you with clicking through? Or do you want to switch halfway through?
Nope, I'll make you co-host right now.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Let me see if I can let Fran in and then we'll get started. All right, so today we want to thank everybody for joining us. College Church, St. Xavier is part of the community-based air quality monitoring program. So for those of you that weren't part of the small like introductory steps back in 2000, even 2021, where we had our introductory session, I would like to give a little bit of background about how this started. So at MCU, we specifically like to organize with churches around their values that have been violated. And it specifically, we wanted to get to the point where we possibly could have policy change around those things. And one of the values that were violated by people that we had spoke to and by reading the Washington Environmental Racism Report was around breathing. You know, unfortunately, disproportionately, there are certain areas, according to that report back in 2019, that had abnormal hospitalizations, increased levels among anyone else around actual emergency room visits. And so we said that as MCU, the board voted to start an environmental justice campaign. So after meeting with Washington, we'll go back to the other slide just so I could talk about Laudato Si. Don't forget Washington University, the Nature Conservancy, Jay Turner's lab, as well as the Environmental Studies Department there at WashU, and input from the Sierra Club, we were able to get funding through the Missouri Foundation for Health to start by looking at what we'll go into in more detail later, particulate matter 2.5 as our first glimpse of what might actually be going on in our air. One of the reasons why we knew or we hoped that Catholic churches might get involved is because of the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si, where he tries to guide the church in caring for creation and actually taking action upon that faith that we have for our creation. So on the next slide, the way that these monitors are being placed is a way for us to try to more equitably, scientifically, and strategically place monitors to try to see this compare and contrast, right? According to the EPA, our population in St. Louis, we may have 1-2 monitors up at the most, and we don't have any say about where they're placed. So we don't know if it is a different kind of air quality that's going on between each location in St. Louis, or if there's something else. And so that's how this particular program, specifically with bringing it to you and talking to you about the results, is a way to start the conversation about environmental justice concerns and the potential of environmental racism going on in St. Louis. So I'll go ahead and pass it to Tyler, and he's going to get really specific in reference to what's going on at your congregation.
Thank you, Beth, for the introduction. As Beth said, again, I'm Tyler Cargill. I'm a third-year PhD student, and I'm in a lab that focuses on doing air quality research. And the reason we do air quality research is because air quality is an issue related to public health. What you breathe is going to affect your health. There's a variety of pollutants out there that can cause cancer, that can increase the risk of your mortality, of dying earlier, that can make you have problems with your breathing, problems with your heart. And we know here in St. Louis that there's a variety of areas where people are suffering from various health ailments. And one of the things that we want to do is figure out whether or not air pollution is contributing to that. And so that's why we partnered with MCU to start putting up air quality sensors around the St. Louis region. So this map that I'm showing you is of our sensors that we have right now. So we have 14 in total. We have some clustered up in the north side. We have some kind of north of the downtown area. We have some in the midtown area of St. Louis, and we have some in the south as well. And again, we're here at St. Xavier College Church, which is 418. So you can see we're located here, centered in the midtown area. And again, this presentation is via Zoom, so it might be difficult to have some dialogue during it, but if people have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and stop me if you want to, or we can save it for the end of the presentation. So we're talking about having sensors up that are measuring air pollution, but we want to know what type of air pollution we're talking about in particular. And what we're looking at is particulate matter. And particulate matter are small particles that are suspended in the air, and they're typically solids or liquids that are in the air. And sometimes they're so small that individually you can't see them, but there's enough of them. If there's enough of them in the air and the atmospheric conditions are right, you can see them. So what I have on the right are two photos showing kind of the horizon of St. Louis City, kind of downtown. So let's say you're driving on I-64, going downtown, going east, and maybe one day the arch looks a little bit hazy, you can't see it as clearly as you could on another day. The difference in this visibility is due to more particulate matter being present in this condition in comparison to this condition. So there's enough in the air that it's interacting with the light in a way that it's making it more difficult to see. So that's just a way to contextualize what particulate matter is. And so it's very small, as I mentioned, and there's typically two generic types of particulate matter that we talk about, PM 2.5 and PM 10. These numbers are basically referring to the size of these particles. So PM 2.5 is going to be smaller than PM 10. And so let's try and put into context for how small these particles are. So if we were talking about PM 10, we would need 5 of these particles aligned side by side to be the width of a strand of hair. So that's really small. And then if we're talking about PM 2.5, we would need 4 of these particles aligned together to be able to span the width of one PM 10 particle. Looks like we got a message, future. So yeah, I'll go ahead and probably look at those messages in the chat and respond to them a little bit after the presentation, but thank you for the feedback. I'll get back to those after the presentation. So again, if you had 4 of those PM 2.5 particles side by side, that would be the width of one PM 10 particle. So that's how small we're talking. And now we talked about what particulate matter is. We want to think about where these sources, what the sources are for particulate matter, so thinking about what it comes from. So this graphic that I'm showing on the top left is showing data from the EPA that is representing where particulate matter typically comes from within the United States. So we're looking at the regional aspect for the United States as a whole. And what they're showing is that this large portion right here is orange, which is for fires. And so we see fires make up a large percentage of particulate matter emissions, which makes sense because this smoke, this soot that you're seeing is made up of a lot of particulates that are able to get into the air. And so fires can affect us here in St. Louis, even if they occur outside of the St. Louis region. So fires on the West Coast, that smoke can travel regionally and hit us here in St. Louis. But we can also have local fires that happen in the city and we can be impacted as well. And then the second category that's maybe tied for second is dust. And so dust is anything that happens where you're suspending dirt or any other type of physical process that causes small particles to be emitted into the air. And so there's natural sources like the Saharan dust events that come from Africa, travel across the ocean and hit us. We also have kind of anthropogenic dust sources. So any type of physical construction activity is going to put debris into the air. And then we have some maybe activities that you wouldn't think of. So your tires on the road, eventually they wear down and that puts tire particles into the air, or your brake pads wearing down and that puts brake pad particles into the air as well. And then tied for second looks like the agricultural industry. So that may be a surprise for some people, but the agricultural industry does a lot of processes that put dirt into the air. So cultivating the crops, harvesting them, tilling the soil, that puts a lot of dust into the air. And they also use a lot of chemicals, fertilizers, that can be released into the air, and then they undergo some chemistry that produces particulate matter. And then for third is stationary fuel combustion. So the process of burning anything is going to put particulates into the air. So for example, looking at this bus that isn't probably as serviced as it should be, it's going to be emitting this black soot, and this smoke is containing particulate matter. And so now we talked about a variety of sources of particulate matter, and we want to think about, okay, so why is it important that we know what particulate matter is and what are its health effects? And so the primary way that particulate matter can cause negative health effects is how it interacts with your body when you breathe it in. So your body has natural defense mechanisms to try and prevent bad things from getting inside you when you're breathing it. So for example, you have your nose hairs, you have mucus, and these are trying to prevent things from getting in that shouldn't. But if the particles are small enough, when you breathe them in, they're actually able to bypass your nose hairs, get past the mucus, and actually get deep into your lungs. And the way your lungs work is that they take whatever you're breathing and transmit it to your bloodstream. So that's how you get oxygen to your blood. You breathe it in through the air and it goes into your bloodstream. But if these particles are small enough that they're able to get into your lungs, they will thus act like oxygen in this case, where they will go from your lungs into your bloodstream, where they can travel throughout your body and cause inflammation and cause a variety of health effects. And so this table on the right is showing the health effects that we know from exposure to PM 2.5. And this is a table prepared by the EPA. They do something called an ISA, which is an integrated science assessment, and they do it every 10 years. So this first column is for 2009, the second column is for 2019. And what they're showing is whether or not long-term or short-term exposure to PM 2.5, is it causing various health effects? So what we see is that it's a causal relationship between mortality and exposure to PM 2.5, which is saying that long-term or short-term exposure to enough PM 2.5 is known to increase your risk of dying earlier. It's also known to cause negative cardiovascular effects. It's known to cause respiratory effects and potentially causing cancer as well. And there's other things that we're still trying to figure out. For example, whether or not it causes nervous system effects, metabolic effects, or if it affects your reproduction and fertility. So that's why it's important that we continue doing data collection so we can inform health studies to see how exposure to air pollution is affecting our health. And so with these health effects for particulate matter, it's important for people to know what's good air quality wise. And so the EPA is trying to contextualize air quality for people with something that's called an air quality index. And so what they do is, based on the amount of particulate matter that's in the air for a time period, in this case 24 hours, they will consider what the amount of particulate matter there is, and they'll let you know whether or not that's good or not. And so they have some various labels. They can let you know if it's good, moderate, unhealthy for sensitive groups, unhealthy, very unhealthy, or hazardous. And so we want to think about what the EPA says is an allowable amount of particulate matter to have. They say for a day, it's okay if we're in the moderate region. So even if we have a yellow day here in St. Louis, technically we're meeting the EPA standards. But the goal is to not have so many moderate days throughout the whole entire year that on average our standard for the year is moderate, because the goal for the annual standard is to be good. So to be meeting EPA requirements, EPA regulations for a year on average, we want our air quality to be good, but on the daily average, it's okay if we sometimes have some moderate levels. And so that's the EPA's standards for what's good air quality or not for particulate matter. And so we want to know, how are they actually measuring particulate matter here in St. Louis? So particulate matter is a regulated pollutant. So EPA is required to monitor for it in certain locations. Here in St. Louis, we meet the population threshold. So we have multiple sites, about 2 or 3. And one of the sites that we have is ran by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And they have these high quality devices that are measuring particulate matter year round. And this is located actually in Blair and Branch. So it's kind of the north side of downtown region. And so they've been measuring particulate matter for years on end. So one of the things that we can do with this data is try and look at historical particulate matter trends and try and understand what particulate matter typically looks like in the St. Louis region. The second thing that we do, before putting our sensors out at the churches, we actually put our sensors nearby the MDNR site to see whether or not they're performing as they should. So we compare them to the MDNR data and do some calibration so that we can trust what our sensors are reading before we put them out. But as I mentioned, this Blair site has been running for a long time, so we can actually look at what historical data has looked like for air quality in St. Louis. So this chart that I'm showing you here is from the MDNR site. And this is basically letting you know what the air quality looked like from February of 2020 up into February of 2021. So we're looking at a year's worth of data, and I broke it up into seasons. So we have winter 2019 to 2020, then we go to spring, then we go to summer, then we go to fall, and then we finish out in that winter of that year, 2020 to 2021. And so these bar charts are showing you how much particulate matter there is on average within that season. So the taller the bar chart, the more on average particulate matter there is within that season. And so what we see is that in the winter and the fall times, typically the particulate matter concentrations are higher than in the spring and the summer. And this is primarily due to atmospheric conditions during the seasons. So in the fall and the winter time, it's colder. It's more difficult for the air to mix. It kind of stays more settled towards the ground. So if there is pollution released into the atmosphere, it becomes more difficult to mix and spread. And so that makes concentrations higher in these time periods when it's colder. In the spring and the summertime, when it gets hotter, it's easier for the air to move. The air is able to rise and able to spread out. And so any type of pollution that we're putting out there, it's easier for it to dilute and spread out. And so that's why we're seeing concentrations lower in the spring and the summertime. And so this is talking about concentrations on average for various times of the year. You might also be wondering how particulate matter concentrations vary by time of day. And that's what this plot is showing. So again, it's from 2020, from February of 2020 to February of 2021. And we're showing on average how much particulate matter concentration there is in an hour of a day. And so this is a military time. So 0 is going to refer to 12 a.m., 1 is going to be to 1 a.m., 2 a.m., so forth and so on until we get to 23, which is 11 p.m. at night. And so again, we want to look at these dots. And so these dots are showing you the average concentration for particulate matter in this hour of focus. And so again, the higher the dot is, the more particulate matter there is within that hour. And so we can look at this plot to show how the concentrations vary throughout the day. So in the nighttime, it's a little bit flat right here, and then we see a small rise around the early morning time, 7 to 8. It dips down, and then it rises back up again around nighttime, around 7 p.m. So the question may be, why do we have this rise around the morning time and also around the nighttime around 8? And so the morning time rise can be attributed to human activity. So people getting up, starting their days, people getting up to go to work. So people driving, and as we mentioned in the previous slides, vehicles are a large source of particulate matter. So that's why we see this rise in the early morning time. And then this rise in the late time of the day is when it starts to get colder in the nighttime. And as I mentioned, when it gets colder, the air starts to sink a little bit more, it becomes more difficult to spread. And that's why we see these higher concentrations in the nighttime. And so information like this might inform the decisions you want to make to change how you're exposed to air pollution. So if I was someone with asthma or had an ailment already that would make me sensitive to air pollution, I might be more cognizant of being outside in the early morning times. Or if it's nighttime, I know some people in their homes want to open up the windows because it's, well, maybe not now since the winter time, but in the summertime, when it's colder, when you open up the windows to cool down your house, that might be kind of a double-edged sword because you could be bringing in more pollution, but you would be reducing your energy bill by being more efficient. So it's kind of a trade-off, and you have to think about that in the decisions that you want to make. So that's talking about things that we've seen for St. Louis City for past data based on the particular location and focus that was in Blair and Branch Street, which is in this location. Now we can start to focus on St. Xavier, which is the church of focus right now. And again, we said this is 418. And if I remember correctly, we've had this sensor up since about May. So we have data from May up until the end of October. But what I'll be showing you is data from May up until the end of September, because that's what I've analyzed so far. And so this plot right here is showing you a similar plot that's breaking down the average concentration of particulate matter in an hour. So again, for example, our horizontal axis is from 0 to 23, so from 12 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. And we're showing the dots are showing you the average concentration of particulate matter within that hour. But each of these boxes is for the month of focus. So this is for May, this is for June, this is for July, this is for August, and this is for September. So we can see how these time of day plots change for the month that we're looking at. And then I also want to point you to this green line. And so this green line, horizontal line on each plot is showing you the threshold for whether or not the concentrations are good or not. So if these black dots are below the green line, that means the air quality meets the EPA standards to be good. If it's above it, that means it would not be good. And so the first thing we take away is that no matter what month we're on, the hourly averages are always below the green line, which is great. That means our air quality conditions are good. And one of the other things we want to notice is, are we seeing that similar pattern where maybe we have a rise in certain parts of the day? And what we see is it depends on the month. So for example, in June, we have a rise maybe in the early morning time around 4 to 5, but sometimes that rise isn't seen for other months where the rise is only seen maybe in the late night portion of the time. So it depends on the month how these time of day profiles vary. But one of the big takeaways that we want to see is that no matter what the month is, our hourly concentrations are in the good region for this location. The next thing we want to look at is how that was for hourly averages, but now we want to think about what it looks like for on average for an entire day. And so this plot is showing on average what is the air quality like for a day from May up until the end of September. So each one of these small plots right here with each one of these bars is for a day of interest at this location. And again, the color of that bar is going to let you know what the air quality is for that day. So green would be good, yellow would be moderate, and if we had worse conditions, there would be different colors. But a big takeaway from this location is that for particulate matter 2.5, the daily averages are typically between good and moderate. So we're not seeing anything else. And if you remember, the EPA says moderate is kind of the threshold for what you should be at on average for a day. That's okay. But ideally, we want to be good more often than not. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more good days than we're seeing moderate days. And we have some days like in early May and mid-June where we have some more moderate time periods. But on average, this location has more good air quality than not for particulate matter 2.5. So then the next question might be, how does this location compare to other churches? And so we can look at other churches in our network that have had data up from May up until the end of September, and we can look at their plots as well. And so again, each of those bars is showing you what the daily average is like, and their color is going to let you know what the air quality was like for that day. And 418 again is St. Xavier. So to orient yourself, 418 here is St. Xavier. And so what we want to do first is maybe compare how 418 looks to all the other churches. And what we can probably notice first is that 418 might be one of the more clean ones in comparison to the other churches. I would say the ratio to green to yellow is more in favor for 418. But that's not to say the other churches are bad, because what we notice is that all the other churches typically have more green than yellow as well, with some churches having a few days where the air quality is unhealthy for sensitive groups like 188, 411, 413, and 421. But what we notice is that, for example, when 418 has some yellow days right here, the other locations are typically seeing those yellow days as well, 190, 189, 189. And so what that's suggesting is that instead of the air quality issues in St. Louis being local, where certain sites are only seeing air pollution events, this is suggesting that more of the air pollution events are spread regionally throughout the St. Louis area. And that's because of how particulate matter 2.5 is. It's so small that when it's emitted into the air, it actually stays in the air for days, if not weeks. So it's able to travel across St. Louis enough so that more of the locations are able to see this type of pollution. And that's why more of our air pollution charts like this kind of look similar amongst the churches, because any pollution that St. Louis is seeing is spread out enough that all the churches are seeing. But overall, the takeaway is that more of the locations with the EPA standards are predominantly good rather than not. But that brings into question, maybe the EPA standards could be hiding something that we're not able to see right now, because there's other regulations. For example, the World Health Organization has guidelines as well for what they think is acceptable for particulate matter in the air. And just to say, if we were to follow the World Health Organization's guidelines, all of our locations in St. Louis would not be meeting those thresholds. We would be considered putting people at risk, we will be considered to be putting people at risk for the air quality conditions here in St. Louis based on WHO, the World Health Organization's guidelines. So maybe that's where we need to think about in the future, is whether or not the EPA's guidelines are strict enough. And also we want to think about, this is only for particulate matter 2.5. There are a lot of other pollutants that we can measure. And so there's things like ozone, nitrogen oxides, VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds. And I can explain more of that if people have questions after the presentation. But again, we've only been measuring particulate matter, and in the future, we might want to expand the types of pollutants we're looking at. And so with that, I'll pass it off to Beth, where she can talk about more of the action steps.
Thank you, Tyler. So again, what Tyler stated at the end is we are still impacted by something causing us to have allergy and asthma. So sometimes when I'm live in a church or in a church basement during service, I'll be like, so how many people in this group, have yourself or someone in your household suffering from allergies or asthma? And so on average, it's 50% to 75% of the room. I just did that with a group of, ninth, or I guess it's freshman year St. Charles Community College kids this morning, and it was 75% for them too. And so if there is health effects related to breathing, then why are we still experiencing these? Is it the standards? Is it something besides particulate matter 2.5? I don't know how much, we probably shouldn't go into it too much, but there's other things like ozone that we can look at. Particulate matter, even smaller, particulate matter 1. So what we created on the website, which I can also put in chat, you see here, AirWatch STL, is there's actually a Google form. So if you or someone is having a breathing problem on a particular day, or smelling an odor in the air, and they would like to tell their story, on the website, there's actually a form that you can fill out, so we can continue to gather these type of stories and figure out what the next steps might be. And a place where these stories can be told and can be told is similar. I believe, Jenny, you probably talked about it at your meetings. We signed those petitions and we brought them to the Missouri Air Conservation Commission. And that is a place for people to not just give like testimony under oath, but just public comment. Every single time that they meet, there is an option for us to continue to tell our personal stories, that the policies that are in place right now around air might not be sufficient to keep our public healthy with their breathing needs. And the next one is going to be online December 1st at 9 a.m. So we'll drop that link in the chat as well. And then there's always the opportunity. I know you guys already meet as a congregational team, and I believe Bill's been there once, sending a representative to, oh, sorry, typo. This was the slide deck from Beta, and I apologize, to send a representative to the EJ task force. So that's a meeting online for MCU, so that everybody can come together and continue to work together on issues of air, water, and land. If you or this group feels passionate that they want one particular topic, or they have one concern that the whole group is motivated around, MCU will be hosting an issue summit on December 10th. So you guys can save the date. This will be an in-person event, so that you can bring your stories and your concerns into the specific work of the entire MCU organization. So I'm going to stop recording now so that we can maybe even start like a discussion and get some feedback and answer some questions.